All right, on Patriots Corner Podcast today, we are going to speak with former United States Army Captain Brian Boyd. Brian, what's going on?
Hey, Matt, how are you today?
Going great. Everything's going fantastic. How you doing, sir? It's a little bit rainy up here at the Rock, but I'm sure it's not much better where you are. You're a Pittsburgh native, aren't you?
Yes, sir, I am. And thank you very much, by the way, for having me on your podcast.
First off, thank you for your service to the country, and your story is so incredible. And when you explained it to me yesterday or 2 days ago, I was very, very eager to have you share it. I feel that you hold a story unlike others, and I feel that it's very interesting and extremely patriotic. So I first off like to begin by asking, how did you get this love for the military? What did you always want to join the United States military, the United States Army?
So, first off, thank you very much for your kind words. I appreciate your sentiments, and I know that you truly feel that way. And so, again, thank you for those kind words. Um, I think you give me a little bit too much credit, but again, thank you for those words. So, I just came from an incredibly wonderful family. I had a wonderful mother. I had a wonderful father. And, of course, they were both very patriotic. My father was in the service. My brother was in the service. My great grandfather was also in the service. And we didn't talk about that. And we didn't talk about this. I'm going to tell you a little funny story about my mom. So when I was a little boy, and I'm 53 years old now, but when I was a little boy, growing up, when my mother used to take me to bed, and put me to bed, and she would usually sing to me, and she would sing the Ballad of the Green Berets.
Oh wow.
Okay, yeah, and I know you didn't hear that before, but that's a true story. And she was a very patriotic person, as was my father, who was part of the greatest generation, and he served in World War II. And so it was a quiet patriotism that you did what you needed to do, and you did what was best for everybody.
I agree. I can't agree. I couldn't agree more. It was just a different time, and I feel that listening to stories even from people who I'm not related to who share stories about that generation. For instance, the Pearl Harbor attack. It was a very emotional time all within the country. People who had no involvement even being over, uh, you know, in that situation in regards to the attack were still extremely moved by it.
Right, absolutely, and they were, and well, there's times are changing a little bit, and not necessarily for the best. And I don't want to sound like an old fart, or someone who's out of touch,
No,
but
you don't sound like that at all. I'm ready to hear.
but there's two words that are only separated by a few letters. One is selflessness, and one is selfishness. Okay, certainly members of that generation were the most incredibly selfless people that I have ever had the pleasure to know, and I like to think that they were they were my role models. Okay, that you need to have selfless service, and that's kind of what the military is. And that's certainly the way they lived their lives, whether it was being a parent to me and my siblings, or just being a good neighbor. Um, and that's what they did. That's who they were, and that's what they believed. Nowadays, I see a little bit more of what about me? What about mine? Look at me! Look at me! Look at me! And that's a little bit disconcerting because now I didn't tell you this either, but um, when I was stationed in Germany for a while, I had a very good friend, Captain Bill McKean. He and I were very good friends. I was a captain, he was a captain, and I'll never forget. One day, he and I were in his office, and we were talking to a soldier, and I stole this from Bill, and I'm giving Bill McKean the credit for it right here. I use it all the time, and I use it with all my kids and everybody that I know, all my employees, and I always have. You always got to do the hard right versus the easy wrong. Okay, it's easy to do something wrong, especially if there's no one around to see it.
Of
you know,
course. Yeah.
and and that came from Bill McKean, and it always stuck with me. It resonated with me, and there was so much truth and reality to that statement, and goodness gracious, I mean, I hope that I do that all the time.
Yeah. And I feel like just that quote, that quote's extremely marvelous. I loved, those kind of quotes are the best quotes I feel with any form of work or any task that you're trying to complete. And hearing it, from you only makes it 10 times better. Do you feel that is that something that you picked up, inherited before, joining the United States Army, considering you were from a military family, or something that you inherited more after, you graduated boot camp and was, a member of the U.S. Army?
No, 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 no. That was instilled by my parents, but I never heard it phrased in such a way. And that's it's a simple saying that says it all. It's what my parents did. It's what they wanted us to do. It's what they expected of us. It was our obligation, and that was their obligation as well. But I never heard it said in such a simple fashion.
Wow. Yeah. And just highlighting how you mentioned the hard right. Doing stuff when other people are not looking, when other people aren't around, just knowing to yourself that you're doing right, which I feel personally, would just continues to build a person and builds confidence level.
Well, it does. I mean, because then it gets to the point where you know life is a series of slippery slopes. I mean, it really is, and you got choices, and well, this doesn't really matter. Well, really? Yeah, it does really matter. Oh, well, no one will notice if I take this quarter. Really? Okay, then it's $1. Then it's $100,000. Then it's like that woman at Matthews who embezzled $1.6 million from her employer. Okay,
Yeah.
you right is right and wrong is wrong, and you you can't get around that fact. Right is right, wrong is wrong.
Yeah. Now, growing up, knowing this already, this stuff instilled by your parents, having this mindset to continue on and have this mental toughness, what was the first step that you took towards joining the United States Army?
So when I was a young kid, I was very active, and all the kids in the neighborhood. It was really I've had the greatest life anybody could ever have. I'm not a multimillionaire or anything by any stretch, but I truly I think I have had like the best life that anybody could ever have. Um, I always had a passion for sports, and I love sports. Okay, and I was fortunate enough to be a pretty fair athlete, and I had an older brother, and I had two older sisters, and they were all pretty athletic, and they were a little bit older than me. But the nice thing about that is I got to see their mistakes, and I got to learn. So I was lucky. Okay, so I was a good baseball player. I was fortunate enough to have a couple of professional tryouts, and I had a few scholarship offers to some very good Division I schools. I also was a fairly decent football player, and I had a bunch of offers for Division II schools. And there's an old adage, and it's not an Army adage. It's just an old time saying that youth is wasted on the young. Where I probably should have focused my attention was baseball, but I focused my attention on football, and unfortunately, as what happens to many great athletes, and then other athletes like myself who were just pretty good athletes, um, I got injured, and back in 1981, when you injured your ACL, that was typically a career-ending thing back then. Today they do microsurgeries, and it's a wonderful thing. God bless America. We have just came so far as the medical field goes, and so I ripped up my knee, and I really couldn't play football anymore. Um, Unfortunately, then that meant that I lost my job at school that I had through the football team, and my father had passed when I was 17, which was a very tough and disheartening thing, because we had sort of really bonded in particular when I started rehabbing my knee, and I got this flyer in my mail that said join ROTC, get $100 a month. And in 1981, $100 a month was like you hit Fort Knox. Holy smokes! I mean, you that was a lot of money. And I said, well, I always liked the Army. I'm in school for criminal justice, and I want to serve people. Well, you know what? I could serve people in the Army, and I always liked the Army, and it does the same thing. It's just on a bigger scale. Yeah, that'll be okay. And I could do the reserves, and I could be a police officer as well. So that's kind of my ascent into my Army career.
Wow. So that the everything before as well, but then right at that mailbox is when the ball got rolling.
That's
That
right.
that's where it all. And by the way, I do have an insider leak. I heard your favorite ball player was Bobby Clemente.
Bobby Clemente was just so beautiful. Oh my God, he was so beautiful. He was the most beautiful baseball player to ever watch. He just exuded grace.
That
He
he
was
was.
amazing.
Yes, he was indeed. My father was a fan as well. So that's such an amazing story, and that's what I love so much about what you just shared in the story behind it is that you did tell me a quote the other day that I'm asking you to share because it sounds a lot better when it comes from you, and it had an impact on me because it's 100% true, and this all goes in connection with who you guys are. The members of the military, you guys are the elite. You could do anything, and I firmly believe that, and I will always believe that. But I really would, I would love for you to share that quote with the listeners.
So you and I, again, thank you for your kind words. I don't know that we're elite. We're just normal people doing what we all should do. But and I all of my friends in the military who have gone through the military, whether they're still in or not in, they'd all share the same sentiment. We're just normal guys, just like everybody else. That's all we are. But so I also used to wrestle, and I loved wrestling. And wrestling's such a great sport. All sports are great because they all teach you different things, but they all tie in together. And I used to be a pretty decent wrestler. Not the first year that I wrestled. I think the first year I wrestled was in seventh grade, and I had no clue what the heck I was doing. And I think I was 0-6. I lost every match. I was 0-6. And then the next year I was in eighth grade. I wrestled, and I think I was 4-4 or 5-4 or whatever. But I was just starting to learn the sport, and I had some great coaches, and I also had great teammates. The beautiful thing about wrestling is, even though it's a team sport, it's also an individual sport. But if you analyze every single sport, they're all the same. A batter and a pitcher, it's a one-on-one battle in a team setting. Okay, and when you're playing football, the lineman, the defensive lineman versus an offensive lineman, and the quarterback. Okay, those are all one-on-one matchups that are determined how the team is going to do. Too often we don't look at it in those terms. Okay, but wrestling is really, there is nobody you can ever blame when you're out there wrestling. You can't say, "Oh, my teammate didn't make a block. That's why I got hit. That's why I fumbled," or whatever.
Yeah, it's
Or,
up to
"Oh, the
you.
third
You're
base,
out there on your own.
yeah, and, oh, the third baseman made an error," and So this is it's really the end of any excuses. Okay, and so you have to be fairly tough minded, and those people that have wrestled and wrestled before will understand completely what I'm talking about. And if you analyze what the statement is, then hopefully you get it too. Not you, but others. It's a refusal to lose. I'd like to win. I don't have to win, but damn it, I refuse to lose.
Yeah.
I refuse to lose. And that's a wrestler's mentality, and that's a soldier's mentality too. I refuse to lose. I'm not going to give up. I refuse.
And that is just such an amazing quote. That truly is. Because, what you guys go through in the training, being overseas, being in situations that could be life threatening, that are life threatening, you still follow that code. You refuse to lose. And that's what I find so amazing about guys like yourself, is that it takes a special individual to inherit something like that.
Again, you're being awful kind. We're all just we're pretty normal, average guys. I thank you for your kind sentiments, but we're all just working together, and we look at each other as teammates. We also look at each other as brothers and sisters. And what would you not do for your family member? Is there
Exactly.
anything you wouldn't do for your family member?
Of course. No. I would do anything for my family member.
There you
And
go.
it's exactly. I agree. So
Yeah.
you go to boot camp. What was that like? I picture, you getting there and it just be eye opening. Did you have any idea what it was going to be like? Did you
So I
know?
had no inkling. I had no idea whatsoever. And the drill sergeants were very similar to head football coaches in summer camps, and they were in your face, and they were barking orders, and they were trying to get you to assimilate, to work together as a cohesive unit. Very similar to football, very similar to sports. We've got to be a team. You got to work together. You're only as good as your weakest teammate. Okay, and again, that goes to the family thing. That goes to the whole piece. It was I did my basic training down at Fort Knox, Kentucky, and
And that was during what
so
year, you had said?
what's that?
And that when did you go to your basic training? What year?
So I was a sophomore. It was after my sophomore year at college.
Okay.
All right, and it was 1983, and so I went to and my father had passed, and again, my poor mother, she was so distraught. She loved my father. That was her life partner, and so she wasn't. The doctor had sedated her pretty much, and she wasn't really around and available to me. But so I went in the summer after my sophomore year.
Okay. So did you prep at all for this, because during that time, you know I know from speaking to individuals, excuse me, I've had on the show before, there was no, use of computer. It's not like you could watch YouTube and find
No,
out.
no.
The only thing I was going to connect it to was, I know in 1981 the movie Stripes came out with Bill Murray.
Which, oh, by the way, was also filmed down at Fort Knox, Kentucky.
Really? Wow, that's interesting.
Yeah, so we used to do some training down in that area, and those barracks are barracks that we used, and so those were actually real barracks. So it's interesting that you mentioned stripes, but they had a hill. There was no prep time. There was no time to look into something and find out what you wanted to do. Truthfully, I was trying to make sure that I could accomplish my goal of being a college graduate. Okay, and so this money was going to help me. And I think I shared with you. I mean, I was working two jobs. I was delivering pizzas for Domino's,
And
and
bouncing,
I
right?
was what's that?
And you were a bouncer too, right? I hope you don't mind
And
that I finished it for you, but I remember you
no,
telling me
no,
that.
that's okay. Yeah, and I was bouncing in the halftime bar. That's right. So,
Well, there you
so
go. You were getting your carb intake, and you were, you were kicking some butt on the side too. You had that, you had that prep already before going in.
okay, all right. So I guess that's the way to look at it. So I went down there, and they were teaching how to be a soldier. They were teaching you the basics of being a soldier. They were getting you into some folks needed to get into better physical shape than others, and the interesting thing is you always had a buddy, okay? And again, I was a college football player, and so they hooked me up. My buddy, and I never shared this with you, Matt. My buddy happened to be the most unathletic guy there,
Oh
okay?
gosh.
And so when when you have a buddy, whatever he can't do, you need to do. And you need to teach him so that he can do it. It's not that you're just doing it for him, it's you're teaching him, okay? And so it's using peer the Army's so smart. It's using peer pressure and also peer reviews and peer helping peer training. Okay? It's a really genius system that they've come up with. So when he had trouble passing his PT test, he had to do remedial PT. Guess who else had to do remedial PT?
You.
I had to do it because he was my buddy.
Oh well. Oh man.
Okay? So when he couldn't polish his boots properly, guess who had to go over it on Saturdays instead of being able to go to the PX or go see a movie? I had to help him. Okay? And but that really fostered a great thing in my head, in my thought process, is you had to learn that not everybody learns the same way. So maybe and you see it in your college classes. You see somebody who's really smart, but they're just not connecting with the professor, right?
Of course, yeah.
And so they get a tutor, right? And that's the whole idea of the tutor is to try to connect in some way. Well, the Army does the same thing, and they do that with the buddy system. So basic training was interesting. It was fun, and it was also very fulfilling too because my buddy graduated as well.
Wow. Now, going through that, especially after graduating basic training, especially during that time in the 80s, what was that like coming out, not to connect it to Hollywood at all. That's not what I'm trying to do because it's not. You guys are the real deal. uh but coming out of basic training now in the United States Army, what was that like? It had to have been a huge accomplishment. It had been an amazing feeling.
So for 200 plus years, being commissioned as an officer in the United States Army or being a member of the United States Army is a big deal. Period. Uh, doesn't matter what time frame. Doesn't matter when. Um, Members of the military, and I'm a little bit particular. I'll say the United States Army, but you know, it the job is not necessarily for everybody, and that's okay. That's all right. But it is a great job, and there's certainly a sense of pride. I talked a little bit about the main focus was to try to make sure that I had enough money to pay for college. And I think I shared this with you when we talked the other day. I got back up to college, and you guys don't know about this, but we used to have to stand in line in order to register for all of our classes. And I got to the ROTC table, and Major Tom Gray said, "Boy, where the hell you been scholarship students are supposed to be here 2 days ago. And I'm like, what are you talking about? I didn't even know that they gave scholarships. But
uh,
I was fortunate enough that I had performed decently enough that they gave me a scholarship, and that was a very prideful moment for me as well. To be honest with you.
yeah, of course. Now, and post graduation, of college, what was the next step? What was now the next, move that you were needed to make now in the United States Army?
All right. So when you graduate, all graduating cadets, whether they're from ROTC, whether they're from the military academy, or whether they're from OCS, get assigned an occupational skill. Okay, and it's not an MOS. That's for enlisted folks, but it's a branch. It's a branch of service. Okay, and I wanted, and since I was a scholarship student, I got my choice on what I could do. I wanted one of two things. I either wanted aviation or I wanted armor, and I was disqualified for aviation because I had multiple knee surgeries, and my legs. There was a potential that I wouldn't be able to use the rudders properly, and so I was disqualified because of my knee surgeries. But I did get my second choice, which was armor. And armor, being in a tank is a pretty awesome thing. And having the shock action and the firepower and the mobility of armor, it's unequaled by any weapon system in the Army's inventory. And I loved it. And so I had to go to Armor Officer Basic course, which I also did at Fort Knox, Kentucky. That's the home of armor. And then while you also get your branch, you get your first duty assignment. And I wanted, I met with my professors of military science, and I asked them what the toughest job was, where the toughest place to go was, and they said, "Well, crap, Korea. It's a hardship tour." So I put down Korea, and I figured that this will be a test for me. I'll decide. It'll be determined whether I can cut it or can't cut it. And I was very fortunate. So I graduated from officer basic course, and then my first duty assignment in 1985, 1986 was in Korea, and it couldn't have gone better. I had such incredible men that worked for me and worked with me. I had a great platoon sergeant who helped me to develop as a leader. He was a wonderful man, fast Eddie Clark. Sergeant First Class Clark was just a tremendous asset, and I owe him a huge debt of gratitude. What a wonderful professional. I also happen to have incredible bosses, and I could say this through my whole Army career. I always worked. I can't think of a single soul that I ever worked with who was not just a top-notch person. John J. Persecki, who was my first commander, he also happened to be my best man at my wedding, and he also taught me so much about being a leader. And I'm very fortunate to have met, known, and become a peer with John Persecki.
Wow. Now, you did say, I want to, just jump back real quick when you wanted to go to the toughest place. You wanted to put yourself to the test. They send you to Korea. Now, if I could ask this, what was it like, being in Korea? It's a jungle. It's, rough terrain from just readings that I've done and research that I have done, and it's a different culture. Now, you being a young age, what was that like? Your first, once you got there, once you actually stepped foot on Korean soil, what was that like?
So, you're talking about the culture, and it is a much different culture. And where we were was Second Infantry Division. is the only division in the Republic of Korea, the only United States Army division in Korea. And so we were stationed close proximity to the North Korean border, the border between North and South Korea. And it was, and the further north you go, which there, other settlements and other places even further north, of course, than Camp Casey. But the further north you go, the less somebody is willing to invest money into infrastructure, and so it's very poor, very rural area. It's very hilly. The terrain is very hilly. I was never so cold in my whole life, and I was never so hot in my whole life, and that describes Korea. Plus, throw in all the hills and mountains. So rough terrain, and it was kind of a culture shock.
Was it a lot of jungle terrain as well?
Well, no, it wasn't. It was more rocky. Now there's lots of rice paddies and things, and that's just their farms. So they're obviously very bad terrain for tanks because their farms, there's rice paddies everywhere. I mean, that's how they did their farming, if you will. Okay, and it was everywhere. And if there wasn't a rice paddy, then there was a mountain or a hill. So, it could be confused as being a jungle-like environment or something like that. But it was a lot of rice paddies. So it was interesting. I think I shared this with you the other day, and if you don't mind, I'm going to tell the story about when we were up north. Do you care if I share that with you?
That's completely fine as long as you're comfortable with it. Yes, that's completely fine.
So we were up north, and probably about a mile and a half away from the Korean border, the North-South Korean border, and there was a farmer there, and we were doing maneuver training, and we had ripped up his ginseng field. I didn't tell you that, but we had ripped up his ginseng field. And this is actually two different stories. And they were so grateful that we were, as Americans and as soldiers, were there to provide freedom for them. We just ruined his whole cash crop for the whole year. He and his family came out and fed our platoon because they were so thankful that we were there. And I'm apologizing to them, and I'm trying to tell them that we'll give them some money. Well, we moved down the road the next day, and we had pulled over. We were awaiting instruction, and a little boy, he had to probably be about 11 or 12 years old, came up to me and started speaking Korean. Now, as an officer, I had a Korean interpreter who was a member of my platoon, and he was on my tank. And the interpreter says, "Sir, they're hungry." And I said, well, get him an MRE, get him something to eat. It was a little boy. I mean, he's 10 or 12, and he had his little sister who was 10 or 12. And he said, well, he wants to sell his sister to you for an MRE. And I said, give him a case of MREs and tell him never to make that offer again. And that's heartbreaking as a parent, as to see what desperation is. Matt, there's days that you and your friends and my sons and my daughters will say, oh my God, there's nothing to eat here. I'm so hungry. You guys, and myself included, we really, truly don't know what hunger is. This kid was willing to sell his sister for an MRE.
Yeah. Wow.
And that's heartbreaking. As a father of 7, I can't imagine what hopelessness they must have felt.
Of course, that's just, I couldn't agree more, and that's just, I can only imagine how much of an emotional time, that would have been. And that's, I agree. Not knowing what hunger is, and even you saying never have been so cold and so hot, and then within the country, people, oh, I'm very cold, or oh, I'm very hot, when it could be cold being a 45 degree, or hot being
Right.
a 60 or 70 degree,
Right.
and I couldn't agree more. So, during that time, traveling through that country, if you don't mind me asking, what was why were, the Koreans very happy that you guys were there?
Well, again, they had learned their lessons about about truly what a despot is. They understand what it is to not have a democracy, and they just wanted to have protection to have their democracy to fulfill their own God-given destiny, and not be a piece of chattel.
Yeah.
So that's all it was. They were happy that we provided them the opportunity for freedom.
Wow. And I mean, it's just the place of traveling from country to country, seeing the different cultures. Did it help you kind of relate? Was it something where you found yourself, when the time you were spent in country, you needed to almost not assimilate to their culture, but kind of see it from, a different standpoint, than rather than growing up in America?
So, so I have a real difficulty with the way an agenda seems to be brewing in America, and this is not directed at you. I'm making a generalized statement here, so try to track with what my jumbled thoughts are.
Of course.
When I was growing up as a kid, it didn't matter. Again, I played sports and I was in the Army or whatever. It didn't matter if the kid was ugly, if the kid was fat, if the kid happened to be a girl. It didn't matter. If they could hit a baseball and they could run fast, they're on my team. That's who I wanted.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I didn't give a crap, and nobody that I knew gave a crap about any of that. Okay. All we wanted to do was get the best possible person we could. So, we fostered friendships that way through sports and through other things. And the military is a great equalizer, too, because nobody cares what color you are. Nobody cares what sex you are. Nobody cares about anything except for you can do your job. It's the great equalizer. Can you do your job? Okay? The other thing, you asked a question about a different culture and celebrating differences. So I'll never forget when I went to my children went to Upper St. Clair High School, great high school, great reputation. So they went to Upper St. Clair, and in seventh grade, I remember seeing the principal talk to the incoming parents, and he said, "Well, we're going to celebrate diversity. We're going to celebrate our differences." And the amazing part of when I grew up, what we tried to do was celebrate how we were alike. And that drew us closer together. Oh, wow, you may be this, but you know what? We have this in common. So when you celebrate your differences as opposed to celebrate how you're alike, you put the focus on your differences.
Yeah.
It's shifting the paradigm from what your true goal is, right? You want
Yes.
everybody to get along. Let's find common ground, and then we can have a better dialogue. Does that make sense?
It does. Yes. Yes, it does. Now I do have one. Oh, go on. I'm sorry.
So that's what we did. Whether I was in Germany, whether I was in Korea, whether I was in Kuwait, wherever I was, and that's what everybody I know did. We tried to find what our common ground was and build from there.
Yes. Now, Brian, I did have a question that just came to mind as of now. It's a question I've been wanting to ask because I feel that it's, in media is currently, taking place and going on, and it's a constant question people ask. It's Hollywood. Hollywood films that come out as opposed to the real thing. Now, during that time, it was a little bit earlier. I did watch it on reruns. My father watched it growing up as well. I know that the TV show MASH was set, was supposed to be in the, set in Korea during the Korean War. Do you feel, once, when you were in Korea, and stationed there, do you feel that Hollywood adds to it? Now, I know there was, not as much conflict going on when, how you said when you were there, but did you ever kind of relate it back to anything that was Hollywood related, and or you know what I'm saying, or?
Oh yeah, not at all, and not at all. And I'll tell you, I watched MASH when I was a young boy too, and it's a satire, and it's written by somebody who is making a comedy, and then they're trying to they're trying to sell a product, and their product is their TV show, and it's their, whenever Hollywood or anybody, a writer, I don't care who it is, what you're getting is their perspective of a story. Okay, so if you look at a video, if you go to class and you hear a lecture, okay, you're going to pull out certain words that lecturer says, and somebody sitting right next to you, who is just as attentive as you, is going to pull out different words from the same speech, right?
Yes.
Okay, so it's all their perspective. I was a criminal justice major. I mentioned that, and the worst witness, the worst kind of the worst thing that anybody can have, the worst evidence is an eyewitness. Okay, the best is the circumstantial and the physical evidence. Okay, because we all see things through our own eyes. And do you ever see a guy who's with a girl and you say, "Oh my God, why does he love her?" You know what? He loves her because he loves her, and he knows her. He sees something different about her. So every book you're ever going to read, every TV show you're ever going to watch, it's through the bias of that person's eye who produced it. Does that make sense?
It does. So it's all on different of how it affects the person, is if I'm
That's
if
right.
I'm correct.
And that's their perspective. That's right.
Wow. So you did and if you feel comfortable going into this topic of conversation, you did serve in Kuwait as well.
I was in Kuwait during the first Gulf War. That's right.
Now, that's where there was conflict and tension taking place, if I'm not mistaken. And
Oh, yeah.
what was that like? Was there any fear before being shipped, to Kuwait, or?
So I've heard this statement before, and it's 100% true. If anybody tells you that they weren't scared, they're either a liar or a psychopath. And I'm going to tell you, I'm not a liar, and I'm not a psychopath, and yes, I was fearful.
And how did you, control, this, that fearful look on it? How did you, control that once you were there? Was it?
Because people depended on me. I didn't have a choice. My men depended on me. If I showed fear, then they were going to be scared. If I didn't show any fear, they were going to think it was all right. Did you ever go into a place that looked bad, and your mom and your dad said, "Oh, it's going to be okay. I'm here with you. We're good."
Yeah.
And that puts your mind at ease. Well, that's what you're supposed to do when you're a leader. And, if you don't do that, people depend on you. And so you do what you're supposed to do.
And that was just, you knowing what you had to do to lead, helped you kind of render a little bit any type of negative maybe thought that came to mind, or?
Well, I truthfully, I mean, what I was most scared about was not being able to see my wife, my daughter, and my second daughter was actually born while I was over there during the war, and I had, that was my fear, that I would never see them again. Okay, and the rest of my family, and that was what I was really most fearful of. As far as being any type of other fear, truly, I I believed in God, His only Son, Jesus Christ, and I knew that whatever was supposed to be, whatever was going to be, and that God and Jesus would be with me. So I wasn't so much fearful of that. I was fearful of leaving them.
And that, I'm sure, relates back to what you said, what you mentioned, before, not going to lose. I
I
refuse to
I
lose.
I I was going to do anything and everything that I could to make sure I could come home to my bride and my children because I love them so much.
Yeah. Wow. And that's just so amazing to hear. And it's just something that I feel, if we could just get into, stuff going on today within the country, is I feel that that's something that a lot of people forget. And that's truly why I love listening to each and every story, that you guys share on the show, is because there's way too many people, in my opinion, in the country who fail to realize that there's people who are doing their job that they're assigned to do to protect everyone else within the country. And they risk something that is more than any other type of title, in my opinion. And I feel that that's a shame that people fail to realize and recognize what a true hero is. And I know you say, just being regular guys, but I really would just like to say that, I've always had this opinion, always had this belief that it the military members, whether it be Navy, Army, Marine, Air Force, Coast Guard, National Guard, it's all something that they do because they truly love to protect, their country. And I think that is the greatest honor that anyone could ever have.
Well, again, thank you. Gosh, you're making my head swell, but uh, thank you so much for saying those kind words. But I was raised that we are supposed to serve others. Uh, we are supposed to protect and defend those that can't protect and defend themselves, and that's a responsibility and it's an obligation. And for those of you listeners who don't understand what the word obligation means, look it up in Webster's. Do they even produce dictionaries anymore? Whatever. Look it up online and Google it. What obligation means. That was a little bit of a joke. I hope it was funny.
It was funny.
uh, so, it's an obligation and it's a responsibility. Okay, and I think that I've got my own perspective on why that's happening. It's because you got some of these stupid TV shows that show excess and show I got this now and I'm going to get this at whatever cost. That's different than refusing to lose. That's being selfish and wanting what I want when I want it, which is right now. It's a totally different thing. And and um, and so I think that has become the new norm. And uh, that it doesn't need to be the case. It shouldn't be the case. It's absolutely the wrong thing. I also think that part of that is my generation's fault because we didn't do as good a job as our parents did on instilling what selflessness actually means as opposed to selfishness. And so that's on my generation, and that's not on your generation. We did a lousy job of showing you as opposed to just having empty words. How's that?
That's fine. And I feel like it goes without, it even goes into, and I hope you don't mind to get, if I do get political, I feel like it goes into, for instance, the, Donald Trump inauguration. When I was watching that, it was just upsetting to see different clips that we were seeing. And some of those clips being this, that really, really, made me both angry and upset. There was a situation where people were blocking off uh, ways into the inauguration, and there were two members of the United States Air Force. One who, possibly could have been retired, and one could have been his son who was active. I'm not positive. But being said, they were not allowed through. And I feel like it connects to the selflessness and the selfishness. People wanting something and thinking that this is how it's going to go, and I'm going to get this, and I'm going to do that for some ridiculous, stupid belief, when really they don't understand. It's the same thing that we hear constantly over and over and over again, that I try to say on each and every show. Way too many people, as of right now, are making comments on stuff that they will never, ever have to be in a situation-wise, or be in the situation they're making a comment on. And that's upsetting to me, because once that is made and that takes place, then it's downhill, and nobody wants to listen to somebody who's actually been in a situation where it could involve uh, military topics, worldwide topics. Do you know what I'm saying?
I do, and again, that so my perspective on that is, there have been presidents that got elected that I didn't want to be elected. I didn't go out and I didn't say not my president, and I didn't do this, and I didn't do that, and I didn't do whatever. That's not good for our country. Okay. Many of the people that I saw interviewed on TV, they had no clue why they were out there. They just were out there, and they were just angry, and they just wanted to be out there. Okay, and it's of all ages. Okay, many of the people who protest have no clue about what the facts are. If you asked many of the listeners that you may have, or don't have, or any people on camp, whatever. Okay, people on campus. So, which party, Democrat or Republican, was responsible for enacting the EPA? Okay, Environmental Protection Agency. I guarantee you, 95% of them would say that it was the Democratic Party. Would you agree with that statement?
I would, yes.
Okay, so it happened in 1970 with President Richard Nixon. Does that surprise you at all?
Yeah, yeah, of course, you're right.
Okay, so if you asked which political party was for working people and trying to protect working people, would you think that perhaps 95% of the respondents would be, well, the Democratic Party?
I feel like, yes, they would. I feel like some Democrats would, yes, say that.
Okay, so I'd say 95% of people would say that, right?
Yeah, I agree, yeah.
Okay, so OSHA, you know what OSHA is?
Yes, sir, I do.
All right, so the OSHA was created in 1983 under President Ronald Reagan.
Yeah, the Almighty.
Okay, Ronald Magnanimous. Okay, so so that is the misconception. That's what I'm telling you. The story, when you were asking about Hollywood, and I said even writers, and I said books or whatever. So the perspective that the reader is going to get is whatever that writer, that director, that producer wants to give you. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the truth.
Yeah. And that's something that we see.
I hope that was eye-opening. I mean,
it was very eye-opening.
It was.
It was, of course, yes, it was very eye-opening. And it's something that, we see as of today. And tensions don't stop, and, stuff continues. But one thing I do have to ask you is, what is your stance on what people should do as of right now? We're seeing this crap still go on with people bashing the commander-in-chief, who, I'm a conservative. I think he's doing a fantastic job. I've supported him since day one, alongside your sons. And what's your stance on people continuing to drag this out more than it has to be?
Well, I first off, I
If you
think
don't
that
mind me asking.
yeah, no, that's okay. So first off, I think that some of them just want to be heard and they want their 10 minutes or 15 minutes of fame. Okay, I think that others realize that the gravy train for some may end, and they don't like that. There has to be some accountability. You know, when there's no accountability for anything, then doesn't matter. You can run amok. Anything can happen. Um, so I then want to say that I have heard from many high-ranking Democrats who have said, I believe they mean it sincerely from the bottom of their heart. Now, not all of them, and I'll say the reverse was also true when President Obama was in office. I've heard these Democrats say, "Well, geez, of course I hope that President Trump is successful because if President Trump is successful, that's good for America." Just like many people did not like President Obama, but somebody who said that they wanted him to fail would be kind of silly because that would mean a failure for America.
Exactly. And I'll tell you one thing. I remember and I was in 8th grade, when President Obama first got elected, and I was not a fan of President Obama. One, I was in 8th grade. Did I really know everything that was going on? No. Is my father going to be upset that I say this? Not at all either. He was not a fan of President Obama as well. But you know what he told me? He sat me down and he said, Matt, he is the commander-in-chief and the president of the United States.
That's right.
You need to respect him,
That's
and
right.
you might not agree with what he says, but he still is the commander-in-chief and he still is
Period.
the president of the United States, and that is it is what it is. And people have continued to drag out an issue that, in my opinion, does not need to be dragged out, and it's very, very upsetting.
Well, it's disheartening because it's disingenuous. It's disingenuous because it's simply because they are upset with what the outcome was. And it's over. It's done. We have to move forward as a country. If you don't like it, you got another shot in 4 years. Actually, you got another shot on different elections in 2 years. Okay? Things don't have to be stagnant. Okay? I will say that anybody at any time who does not want the United States of America or a certain president to do well is completely wrong because that's not good for any of us. It wasn't good when for anybody if somebody wanted President Obama to do bad, if somebody wanted President Bush to do bad, if somebody wanted President Clinton to do bad, or if somebody wants President Trump to do bad. None of it is good for America. And I think some of it is disingenuous. I think some of it is out of fear because they realize the gravy train is coming to an end. And so if your job was coming to an end and you knew it was coming to an end, would you be in a happy place?
No, but it goes with what you're saying is that you need to find a way to adjust yourself and maybe not
That's right.
even focus on the media, but know to yourself that this is how it is. This is how it has to be. This is what's
And,
taking place in reality. You cannot go back in the past.
and I feel so sorry. I keep reading these news stories, and I truly hope they're fake news. But I keep reading these news stories and seeing these things on TV. How people are traumatized, and oh my God, holy smokes! I hope they get help because they're not going to make it when they get out of mom and dad's basement or out of their bedroom. The real world is it's it's not that easy. They need to get more of a I refuse to lose mentality than oh my God, I'm traumatized, and you need to have a special safe zone for me. That's very fear. That makes me very fearful for their future.
Yeah, of course, and you know what, and I couldn't agree more, because that's something that we're seeing taking place now, that I feel like, and I'm 22 years old, that has appeared out of nowheres, when let's take it back 30 years, or maybe even more, let's take it back 50 years, and if that idea had come to mind,
We'd be speaking German right now.
yeah, I don't even know what kind of response anyone's grandfather or father would give to something like that. And that is, it's just a sense of weakness, and it's not what America is. And that's what I truly you know love about America, is that America is the best country in the world. Myself, and I know you as well, hold it to a high standard.
The
And
history of the world, not just the world, but the history of the world.
of course, and it needs to be held to the high standard, that the peak that it is on. And way too many people will find a way to say something snide that makes absolutely no sense. It is the best country in the history of the world, and it will continue to be like that. But that is why. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. It's number one, Matt. It is the most generous country in the history of the world. If there is an earthquake, a tsunami, some kind of natural disaster, we're the first people there. We stay there the longest, and we go to help. We do what we're supposed to do. That's what we're supposed to do, right? I said that earlier. Help those that can't help themselves. That's what we do, and that's who we are.
Of course, I remember when 9/11 happened. You know, they did not stop searching for those people who could have passed or could have still been alive till everybody was found.
That's right. And the other perspective is, for those that they just want to go out and they just want to complain or do whatever, I'll say I think of Mahatma Gandhi, and a saying that Mahatma Gandhi had, which really resonated with me. Mahatma Gandhi said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." Okay? It doesn't take a government program. It doesn't take something else. It takes an individual person taking one step forward and then another step, and then getting others to help them take another step. If you want to help your neighbor, get out of your house, walk next door and say, "Neighbor, how can I help you?"
Yeah, of course. And that's the truth. And I think that was so amazing to hear from you. And I would like to say thank you, Brian, for being on Patriots Corner. It's been an honor to speak with you, hear your story. You have such an amazing story. You've done so much for the country, and I thank you, from me to you. Thank you for your service. Guys like yourself deserve a thank you all the time, because you do a lot, and you're still doing a lot. You're still in that mindset, and that is just so incredible. And it was an honor to have you. It was I really did enjoy this. I really do thank you for your service, and thank you for being on the show, sir.
Hey Matt, thank you again. Your words are way too kind. I'm just a normal guy, but I appreciate being on the show with you.
Oh, do you want to get? I'll say this. At the final, do you want to give a shout out to anybody? I know that there'll be some special people who are real excited to hear you on Patriots Corner.
All right, so there's 7 of them that I got to give a shout out to: Olivia, Sarah, Sam, Gabe, Luke, Ben, and Nick. My kids, who I love to death, and they're the best kids any father could ever have, and ever has had in the history of the world.
Right on, sir. Thank you so much for being on the show, and thank you for your service. I look forward to, possibly maybe doing a follow-up in the future, and, thank you again. I do appreciate it.
Have a great day, Matt.
You too, sir. All right, that was just former United States Army Captain Brian Boyd. Brian has an amazing story. The quote that I want to touch on once more that Brian said during the podcast was, I don't have to win, but I will refuse to lose. And I feel like that's something that everybody needs to inherit and think about, because it's the truth. And especially being from, coming from a member of the United States military just makes it, in my opinion, 100 times better. And it makes the quote 100 times more impactful. It's just something that special people inherit. And I do feel that special people inherit that. And then there's people who don't inherit that. And it's sad that they don't. But I could tell you right now that, like I, say always, I am 10% a supporter of the United States military. These men risk their lives. They leave their families, for a certain amount of time. And, it's an honor to always speak and hear from them. And I would like to give a shout out to, Mr. Brian Boyd, and thank him again for being on Patriots Corner. He has an amazing story, and I was honored to listen to it. He took time out of his day to share his story, and it was such an honor to listen to. So thank you, Brian, for being on the show. It was an honor. And, guys, have a fantastic weekend. We will follow up next Friday. All right, Patriot on.